is Dr. David Tranter with the Center for Relationship-Based Education, and I'm the co-author of the book, The Third Path, A Relationship-Based Approach to Student Well-Being and Achievement. It's March right now, so I thought I'd make a video about motivation. In this short video, we're going to look at the 4 strategies that educators can use to help themselves and their students be motivated throughout the rest of the school year. The most important thing that we need to start with is recognizing that your attitude and energy as the educator is contagious. You're going to set the tone for learning and behavior, and your students are going to look to you for their motivation, especially for the remainder of the year. So this video is going to really focus on you. What are the 4 things you can do to keep your motivation up so you can keep your students motivated as well? We all need a sense of control in our lives. We feel more motivated when we have a sense of control, and we struggle for motivation when we feel our lives aren't within our control. And this can be very true in the classroom since there are so many things that we can't really control. So how do we increase our sense of control in the classroom? Well, ironically, it's not by becoming more controlling. Becoming more controlling in the classroom is kind of an old school educator thing to do. When they felt out of control, then they would exert more power over their students trying to regain control of the classroom. Of course, what typically happened in those circumstances is that the students push back, you get yourself into a power struggle, you're going to be outnumbered, and it's going to be exhausting for you. So becoming more controlling doesn't usually increase your sense of control. It can make you feel more powerless. Instead, what we need to do is clarify what we can control, what we can't control, and also what we can partially control. If we can categorize all the things in our lives in these groups, then we can respond to them appropriately. So let's start with the things that we can't control. Most of the things in our lives we simply can't control. That list is pretty big. And it's important to recognize what's on that list. Things like traffic, of course, the weather, accidents, world events, whether or not we age. We can't control the past. We can't control the future. We can't control what others think and say about us. We can't control the education system. And if you've ever owned a cat, I don't have to tell you, you can't control a cat. So what do we do? What do we do with these things that we can't control? Well, often the problem is that we spend a lot of time thinking about these things. They're a sort of source of great frustration to us. And we exert a lot of mental energy to them, but really kind of to no avail. And since we have a finite amount of mental energy, the challenge is to shrink it down in our mind and spend a little less time worrying and feeling frustrated about things we can't control. Of course you can think about those things, but you should fight those battles as you choose, not let other people choose those battles for you. You know that you're going to spend mental energy on these things and not get a lot in return, so think carefully about sort of what you want to do and when you want to do that. The second category is a little trickier. It's the category of partially control. In this situation, there are things in our lives that we can influence, but we can't always control them. And in the classroom, it's really just about everything in the classroom. We can partially control student effort. We can partially control student grades. We can partially control student behavior. But the important thing is that we can't fully control it. We need to know that we can influence student behavior, but there are so many other factors that also influence student behavior that we're just part of that. Their home life, their peers, their personality, all work with us to influence the student behavior. We don't influence it alone. There's all kinds of things. So what you need to do is remember that you can't control that behavior. And interestingly, what happens is it doesn't mean that you give up. It means that you're more likely to maintain your motivation. When you just realize that you're influencing student behavior as opposed to trying to control it, then you're going to be less likely to make your motivation contingent upon the student response. When you think you can control the student, then when you feel like you're not being successful, you tend to feel unmotivated. But when you realize that you can only influence them, you're more likely to act in accordance with what you think is right rather than react to their response. And this brings us to category 3, things you can control. And here's the big long list of things you can control. Just you. You're the only thing you can control. And even that's tough. The truth is you can only control your own conduct. And that really isn't an easy task because things like feelings are often beyond your control, but your behavior technically is within your control. So that's the only thing you control. So that's the kind of thing that you need to focus on. Focus on you. And the challenge here is for you to be as self-aware as intentional as you can be. The more you can act in a way that's in accordance with your beliefs, the more you'll feel a sense of control. And the more you are the kind of person that you want to be, the more you will feel successful and the more that you will feel motivated. The second strategy is to increase your sense of progress. I mean, school is really about making progress. There's a strong expectation, of course, that as an educator, you help your students make progress throughout the school year. The difficulty is that often we imagine that progress should be linear, that each day, each week, each month, students should be increasing their level of progress. But of course, that's not how human beings work. The way progress really works when it comes to learning and development is that it's really messy. You make progress, and then you go back, and then you go over here, and you slowly make progress. And throughout the course of the year, you make progress, but from day to day, from week to week, progress is sometimes hard to see. And that can really sap our motivation because we have expectations about where we think students should be and as an educator where we should be, but the reality doesn't necessarily match our expectations. So the first thing you need to do is accept where your students are and accept where you are. Try not to compare yourself to where you think you should be. Try not to say to yourself right now, for example, it's March. Try not to say, well, this is where I should be in March. You are where you are. Try not to think, well, last year with my students I was here in March. I was a lot further. I should be here now. That's not going to make you feel very good either. And similarly, if you hear stories from colleagues about the progress they're making in their classroom and you feel you're not, then that's not helpful either. You really have to accept where you are and try not to compare yourself with other people or other things. Now, accepting where you are is important, and it doesn't mean that you are staying where you are. And sometimes people think it means lowering your expectation, but it doesn't. It means being realistic about what's happening now. It also doesn't mean that you're being complacent. In fact, what it does allow you to do is be really, really honest and clear about where your students are at and where their learning needs are and where you can go. You begin to let go of frustrations that you're not where you think you should be, but also fantasies about where you think maybe students are and they're maybe not there. You need to come right back to reality and say, well, it doesn't really matter what time of year it is. This is where my students are at. I need to move them forward from here. The second thing you need to do is really focus on small successes. One of the difficulties that we all have is that we tend to recognize success when it's bigger, and we tend to value success when it's bigger. Too often, those really small little moments, we either don't value them enough or sometimes we don't even see them. It's really important to shift our thinking and look for those small things. This is human nature, that at first those little movements forward we don't necessarily see, especially since sometimes they're followed by a movement backward. But then eventually we see a pattern, and then we recognize it as success, and then we feel good. But we wait a long time sometimes before we can feel good because of that pattern. The challenge is to see those moments, those day-to-day moments. They're small and really tough in some ways to recognize or value. But those are the things that we need to focus in on so we can recognize them, support them in real time, and celebrate them. And then the third thing you need to do is to think about what's not happening in your classroom just as much as what's happening. Too often we only think of success as what's newly acquired, what new things are happening, what have we added, what can the student do now that they weren't doing before. But it's just as important to think about what's not happening. What are students not doing now that they were doing before? And this is where comparisons to September and October can be useful because it can help you remember, oh, right. I mean, my students had these kinds of struggles in September and October, and now those struggles have significantly decreased. It's also really important not to treat this as an all or nothing thing. Don't look at the behavior as what has stopped. Just simply look at what kinds of struggles and behavior has decreased. Strategy number 3 is all about increasing your sense of purpose. One of the things that's really tough in education is that Of course, as the school year goes on, you're delivering curriculum, you're dealing with tasks and behavior and all the demands of the day-to-day work that you have to do. What happens is your intrinsic reason for being an educator, the intrinsic purpose that you once had, gets clouded out by extrinsic demands. And those extrinsic demands are so powerful and so kind of all-encompassing that the intrinsic reasons for why you do what you do start to get a little fuzzy. This happens not just throughout the course of a school year, this happens throughout the course of a teacher's career. The kind of intrinsic reason that you became a teacher that you were maybe really clear on in the first year or two of teaching starts to get very fuzzy. Not necessarily too because you've lost it. It's because maybe the reason that you became a teacher in the first place has shifted as your career has matured. Now, this is really important because challenging times require us to have some sense of purpose and meaning, and teaching is so challenging. And without some sense of deeper meaning for why we're doing what we're doing, then you're kind of anchorless, you're rudderless. You don't really know why you do what you do, other than you just got a lot to do and you got to keep doing it. That doesn't make for a very satisfying or fulfilling situation. So let's talk about what you can do to increase or reinvent your sense of purpose. So if you want to rediscover it or reconnect with it, reinvent it, you need to ask yourself some deeper questions. There's lots and lots of questions you can ask yourself, but I'm going to cover 4 education-related ones and then 3 broader kinds of existential ones. So these 4 are simply, ask yourself again, why are you a teacher? Why do you do this? Truly, 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 why are you a teacher? The second question is, what is your true job as an educator? What do you see as your real job? Now, is it really just delivering the curriculum, or is it something more? Is it something deeper? Is your real job something deeper? The third question is to ask yourself, what do your students really need from you? Do they just need to learn some things based on the curriculum, or do they need more from you on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis? What do they really need, and how can you give that to them? And then finally, if you've taught for a little while, take your experience and turn it into wisdom by asking yourself, what have you learned over the years that have taught you the most about teaching, about what matters most? What have you learned about the most important things you need to do? Start to try to articulate that, and then that can guide you from day to day. Again, that becomes your rudder when things get so busy and kind of crazy. Now, the other thing you can do is ask yourself some even deeper questions, both in terms of your professional and your personal life, so that you'll feel a greater sense of personal purpose along with your professional purpose. And here are 3 big questions you can ask yourself. First of all, ask yourself, what is important to you? And don't just keep it to things like friends and family and some of the ones that are, of course, are important, but they're pretty obvious. Go deeper than that. What's important for you to do? What kind of qualities are important to you? What's important to you in terms of a friend? What kind of values and beliefs are most important to you? Take some time to reflect on those. And then ask yourself, what are you truly good at? Where are your talents? Where do they lie? What are you best at? And of course, then you begin to ask yourself, how do you do the things more frequently that you're truly good at? And then ask yourself, what is your larger potential? In what areas can you grow? You've got lots and lots of potential, I'm sure, and the question is, like, what is it? And how can you start to really self-actualize a little bit more? Think about the areas of growth that you have left to discover and how you can spend more time and energy pursuing that potential. The final strategy is to strengthen supportive relationships. As the school year moves on, we get so wrapped up in all the tasks that we have to complete, so drained, so exhausted, so depleted, that we let some of our relationships drift away. It's human nature to spend a little less energy and time on our relationships when we don't have a lot of energy and time to spend. The problem with this is that it leads to isolation. We end up being alone, and this is really important because it's our relationships that feed us our energy, that give us motivation. It fills our emotional account, our emotional bucket. We need that coming in from our supportive relationships to keep going. And when we're isolated, we start to get drained of that. So what can you do to kind of strengthen your relationships again? Fortunately, it's not technically difficult, although it sounds easier than it really is. So I'm going to break down the 3 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just check in with others regularly. Just simply go to people and say, how are you doing? With no agenda, with no expectation, no attempt to try to tell them how you're doing. Just go in into that relationship and into that conversation, wanting to know simply how they're doing, and just wait. And do the next thing, which is to listen. Take the time simply to listen. Don't try to fix whatever they say. Don't try to give them an opinion. Don't share your story back with them necessarily. Just listen. It's something that's really quite extraordinary to do because it's very rare that any of us have in our lives someone who's willing just to listen to us without them listening just so they can pause and then tell their story. Try not to do that, at least early on. Try simply just to listen without any kind of an agenda. And then what you can do is you can express empathy. You can be empathic. You can express understanding and emotional support. If they're struggling, genuinely respond to that struggle emotionally. Say things like, that sounds really hard. My goodness, I didn't realize. Again, don't try to fix it. Don't try to tell them a story. Don't try to do anything with it other than simply express empathy. It's the most powerful thing that we can do. That's the thing that we all want most, is someone just to get us, just to understand us. And if you can do that, that's going to really deepen your relationships. And this is really important because although you might say, geez, that's a lot of giving to others that I have to do, there's a reason for this, and that's because you will start a snowball rolling. If you're the first person to connect with people, then they're going to be more likely to connect with someone else. They're going to be more likely to connect back with you. And you'll be the one that starts that small snowball rolling that creates a real culture in your school of support and connection. But it has to start with someone. And so it really should start with you. Don't wait for someone to initiate contact with you. You should be the person to initiate it first. So, in summary, what are the 4 strategies to motivate you and your students for the remainder of the school year? The first one is to try to focus on your own behavior. Try not to make whether you are your best self contingent upon whether others are being their best self. Remember, you can only control you. So really work on controlling you so you can be your best self and feel successful as a result. The second one is get really good at spotting and celebrating all the small moments of success that happen each day. Every day there's going to be all kinds of really important little moments. Become expert at recognizing them and capitalizing on those so you can really build from there. Third, stop and reflect on why you are an educator. Take the time to pause and say, why do you do this job? What is your true purpose? And also ask yourself, what do your students truly need from you? What do they need more than anything else from you in your capacity as an educator? And then finally, be the first to reach out and support others. Don't wait for others to reach out to you. Initiate reaching out and know that some people will reach back and many people will reach out to others, and together you'll make a difference. And finally, I would just like to encourage people to go to our website, relationshipbasedschools.com, and visit the Center for Relationship-Based Education and click on the Join Our Movement button so you can be part of the Relationship-Based Network. You can learn more about our center there, but basically what it is it's a place for educators, parents, researchers, advocates in general to work together to strengthen relationships in schools, knowing that relationships are at the core of all learning and development. And those are the relationships between educators and students, from students to students, between educators and the school, and between educators and the community at large. Relationships really are the source of success. So please go to relationshipbasedschools.com to learn more. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.